He
I want to get it on the podcast. Hi, Jackson.
okay. He was our emotional support dog at the dispensary from day one. He was a puppy. And the beautiful thing about golden retriever is people just naturally feel comfortable
Yeah.
if they're not afraid of dogs around golden retrievers. And patients would come in, and just have their affairs in order. They would be very sad. Everything tried everything and nothing worked, and they were looking for cannabis as the holy grail. I always set expectations about that, and that's another story. But Jax would walk into the room, and the room would just change, into a happy place. So that's what this little guy did, and he did it very well.
Awesome. I'm glad we could get him into the podcast. Well, Joseph, I want to give you this space uh, to just formally introduce yourself to our audience. Tell us who you are, and you mentioned you've been in the cannabis industry for a while. So,
Yeah, I guess I was one of the pioneers, back in 2013. I was aware Illinois was going through the legislative process to legalize medical cannabis. And I just thought, hey, this could be pretty cool. I saw an episode on 60 Minutes called The Green Rush. And it was, that was from Colorado. And I just figured, okay, it's coming to Illinois. Let's see what we can do to, I can do to get a license. And so initially, I just started reaching out, and I connected with a group, a guy who owned a compounding dispensary in Chicago, and his partner. And and one of the things I want to mention, and I think this is good advice, is for your plan A, you got your plan A, you should always have a plan B because oftentimes plan A doesn't work out. And so these guys were great guys, but the guy who owned the compounding business was in finance, accountant, I believe, and he just got freaked out when he started looking at some of the obstacles, namely from his perspective, 280E, which is an IRS rule that doesn't allow business expenses to be deducted in an illegal operation, which is a cannabis dispensary, which is illegal at the federal level. So they backed out. But at the same time, my plan B was a neighbor of mine. Our daughters played together, and we were good friends with this couple. They're both lawyers, and I kept him sort of up to speed on what I wanted to do, and that was my plan B, and that actually worked out. He's a lawyer. He worked for a big law firm, and he had a boss who was, of course, also a lawyer. And we had some meetings at the very beginning. We needed to raise some money. We all put in money, but at the same time, we thought, well, let's just go ahead and put together 3 applications with the hope of getting 1 license. If we got 3 licenses, then well, we're going to need a source, a larger source of money. And so the owner of this law firm wasn't necessarily interested, but he had a son who was passionate about the industry. So we had a meeting at my friend's law firm, and it was the young lawyer, myself, the old lawyer owner, wealthy guy, and his son. And and after that meeting, I went back to my friend's office. We closed the door, and I said, and can I use profanity here?
hell yeah.
Hell yeah. I said, you gotta fucking be kidding me. I said that son has got to be just the most. Well, anyways, he wasn't a very smart guy, but
Okay.
I don't uh, I don't diss him for that. I just think that his issue was he thought he was the smartest person in the room, and that's where the problem began.
Yeah.
Um, the old man said yes, and we had our big source of funding, and so we got another partner who was another pharmacist who owned some compounding pharmacies, not the same ones that I originally, my plan A. And so we formed this partnership. 2 lawyers, 2 pharmacists seemed like a good mix of individuals, to really put together a quality application. Every meeting that we had was wrought with just issues. The son who wanted to be very involved, just really didn't have the capability and the smarts to really do anything. And there was always arguments. And these meetings were just yelling and screaming and just a lot of nasty words. And then the other pharmacist got kind of tired of the whole thing, and he sort of bowed out after we opened our dispensary. But I want to get into the good stuff. The good stuff is that we opened on December 21st, 2015. We were successful getting one license, and that was in the North Shore. And we were the 12th dispensary to open. I think the second dispensary to open was just 7 or 8 miles north of us, and they had 400 people at their door on day one. We had 3 people at our door on day one. We had nobody on day two. I had a staff. We were just all ready to go, and we had to cut hours, cut staff. It was a very dicey first year, just because we had to establish ourselves as being unique and different, in which we eventually did. And that uniqueness and difference really came about because I'm a pharmacist. I've got a master's in business. And I hired other pharmacists, and we had a hospice nurse, and we had healthcare professionals on board, really on board, to help patients. And that's the reason why I got into this business, was to help patients, not necessarily just see that pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, right? So we had a humble beginning, and we did some things that were very unique. We had formed relationships with 2 local colleges of pharmacy. And we had 4th-year pharmacy students doing, for the first time in the country, one of their required advanced pharmacy practice experience. It's called APPE, clinical rotations, for 6 weeks, but for the first time in a medical cannabis dispensary. And so every 6 weeks, we had 2 new 4th-year pharmacy students coming in. And one of their requirements was to give a presentation to the staff. So every Tuesday morning, we would have a staff meeting before opening, and we would have these pharmacy students, talk about one of the qualifying conditions and the drugs that are used for it, and then how cannabis could be a better option. And so over the course of 2 years of this every Tuesday, I probably had the most educated staff, in the state of Illinois. And no other dispensary in the state of Illinois had what we had: full-time healthcare professionals working full-time. And that's sort of like how we differentiated ourselves, and we got very busy as soon as people started realizing, hey, there's a dispensary with actual medical professionals in there. And doctors couldn't recommend our dispensary, but what they would do is say, okay, they would have a patient, and they would certify their patient for medical cannabis. And they would say, well, here's a list of the dispensaries. There's ones in Mundelein, this one's in Deerfield, this one in Buffalo Grove has pharmacists, on staff, and this one, and so they would just, do it like that. And that sort of skirted, the issue of them actually recommending a specific dispensary.
Right.
And normally patients would just sort of like, their eyes would light up, and they would perk up, and they say, oh, wow, I'm going to go to that dispensary. So, and then I started giving presentations at cannabis conventions and pharmacy conventions. And, early on, what was interesting is pharmacists are generally very conservative. And my first presentation was in Florida at the National Association of Specialty Pharmacy. And, I came up with this informal survey. I would, before I started talking or presenting, I would say, okay, you're all healthcare professionals in the audience. Let's see a show of hands for those pharmacists that believe that we should take front stage in this industry. We should have pharmacists in every dispensary. And, back then, maybe half the hands would go up and the other half would not. And I would say, well, I hope I can change some minds after my presentation. And so, but more recently, I gave a presentation in Chicago to about 250 pharmacists at a local restaurant. And all 250 hands went up. So there's been a groundswell of interest, and I know many pharmacists that are in this industry and are doing the right thing. But the whole idea of pharmacist mandates are only in a handful of states.
Right. I
Really
was
is.
actually just Googling that. I was trying to see. I was aware that some states mandate it, but I couldn't remember which ones.
Well, Pennsylvania's one. Is New York one? Louisiana. Yeah, I don't have a list in front
It's
of
all
me, but
good.
I know there's a handful of states
Yeah,
that do mandate pharmacists. But I think the issue, and I'm thinking about Pennsylvania in particular, where there is a pharmacist mandate. I mean, some of the owners really took that seriously, and they had pharmacists out front, talking to patients, doing the consultations. And I'll get into what we did with consultations. But other dispensaries, and actually this has happened over time as these dispensaries have been sold to big MSOs. Um, you know, pharmacists are expensive, and I think these big MSOs, sort of look at the bottom line, and they begrudgingly, have pharmacists on staff, but they don't really have them out front unless the patient specifically asks for it. So it's not like an active kind of involvement. It's more of they put them in the back room to certify patients, and maybe they have part-time or something like that. In our dispensary, what we would do with every patient walking in, and generally they were open to this. We would sit down and have anywhere from 20 minutes to a 2-hour consultation. I mean, some patients needed a lot of hand holding.
sure.
And I actually had patients that I would say, I don't think, cannabis should be a first line for you. Here's some drugs. Anyways, so, I actually turned some patients away, but we had a beautiful situation. I had product specialists, and I never used the term bud tender. We always use the term product specialist. And I would, have this consultation, and I would take notes, and the patient would fill out this form that was similar to what you would fill out if you went to a doctor's office for the first time. All your demographics, your medical history, your family history, your eating and sleeping habits, the drugs you take. And we would take that form and we would review that while we were, interviewing the patient. And I caught so many drug interactions that we're causing some of the patient's problems. Serotonin syndrome is one of the things, and there's drug combinations that can cause that. And I say, have you talked to your doctor about taking these two drugs together? And the response was usually no, I really haven't, but thanks for letting me know. And so, we would, and then once I determined the cannabinoid, ratios and the dosing intervals and the route of administration, I would have a talk, with one of my product specialists. I say, okay, here's this, patient, XYZ, and this is what I feel we need to give to this patient to help them. And then my product specialist, who they knew the inventory, they knew the products much better than I did, would pick a product, and that's how it worked out. And we had a lot of successes. Normally, we would hit the bullseye 50% of the time, with the first visit, but then we would tweak in visits, like in a week or 2 weeks or a month later, if they really weren't getting the benefit that we hoped they would get. So, you have any questions? I mean, that was sort
Yeah,
of
I
me.
do.
Yeah, go ahead.
I do have a few. I like that how you described you approached this, especially when folks consider, just for context, folks, this was one of the most regulated medical cannabis programs in the nation. And I'm not even talking about the regulations themselves. I'm actually referring to the low number of conditions that you could qualify for. And so I think that what you did was just, it seemed more critical then than ever because it was such a limited list. So I wanted to just thank you for putting such an emphasis on patient care. Right. So thank you. I just wanted
You're
to
welcome.
say that. And I
Well,
wanted
mhm.
you to maybe get into deeper something that you alluded to twice that I agree with, but I know that some people might find it a little controversial. So let's tiptoe. You mentioned that cannabis may not be a holy grail. I agree with that. I don't think it's the solution to everything. And you even mentioned that some patients, after speaking to them a bit, you turn them away. I've had to do the same thing with my friends where they have picked up somewhere in pop culture that they're having issues and they're like, Cole, I know you smoke weed and you do can we smoke weed together? And I'm like, what, why do you want it? Like, I mean, sure. Yeah. But let me ask you, why do you want to do that? And then they get into it. I'm like, there's a concept of set and setting, right? And that's usually used for psychedelic drugs. But what I described to them was it sounds like your mindset, and this is an anecdotal experience, but I was like, your mindset doesn't sound like what you need right now is cannabis. It sounds like what we need to do is go on a walk and talk to each other. But if they ended up still deciding that they wanted cannabis, but like you say, I don't view it as an off the hip, holy grail solution. So I'm curious to hear your perspective and how you approached that with patients, because I have similar ideas, I think, based off of what you said.
Well, let's take an extreme example of that.
Sure.
You know, we had, many cancer patients walking into the dispensary. And, I think the most important thing that we did was set expectations. Some of them were just, on chemotherapy. Some of them had just been diagnosed and were looking to do something other than radiation and chemotherapy. So, sitting down, we always wanted to let them know that this isn't the holy grail, that there are some anecdotal studies out there that actually show how cannabis kills cancer cells. But and then what I would do with these patients, we would talk about two things. We would talk about, okay, let's talk about some of the stuff that's going on with you, the palliative side of this, the sleeping, the pain, the anxiety, the depression. We can treat those things with cannabis pretty effectively. But as far as treating your cancer, I would always share with them two podcasts from a doctor in Colorado, Dr. Joe Goldrich, who is still around, but I believe he's retired now. And he treats. I'm not sure if he's an oncologist or if he's a medical doctor, but he treated specifically cancer patients with cannabis, and he did studies, and he did presentations, and he did research, and he did a couple of podcasts. And I would share those podcasts with these patients. I say, listen to these 2 hour long podcasts, and then let's talk again about using cannabis for your cancer, because I'm not sure that's really going to help you. And we have to be careful about this. I don't want to go up against your oncologist and the chemotherapy regime that they prescribe for you. And then if we did go ahead and go that path of using cannabis, we had our own protocol, as well as we had protocols from the CDC, not the CDC, from these doctors that used cannabis to help patients on flooding the system with cannabinoids over a specific period of time with specific cannabinoids. And let's just see how that works out over a period of time. So we would approach it very carefully. And I think, to your point, you just can't say this is the holy grail. This is what's going to help you. It might, but we just don't have enough.
And could I put it a different way really quick? If people aren't understanding Holy Grail, it may not be a universal fix, right? Is that a fair way?
That's a better way.
Yeah. So, and I guess the reason I fixated on that is because, look, I love how easy it is to acquire medical cannabis. In fact, my brother, who is a Marine and suffers from post-traumatic stress disorder, just got his medical card last week. And it was a very easy process for him versus the experience that I had where my doctor, like, we don't have to get into it all, but I ended up having to go to another doctor before I went to my primary care. He just didn't feel comfortable signing off on it immediately, and ultimately did. But anyways, what I'm trying to highlight and what I feel you provided is that palliative care. And I don't know exactly what that word meant, so I had to Google it. Palliative care is specialized medical care for people living with a serious illness. Again, at the time, it was only people with serious illnesses. And I guess what I'm trying to say is you filled a gap most people don't understand that this isn't a prescription to cannabis. It's a recommendation. Can you talk about that a bit? Because I feel like that's the gap you were filling.
Well,
Do you get what I'm saying?
we sort of were, coined ourselves as pharmacist practitioners. And doctors, and I don't believe this is the case anywhere in the country where a doctor can actually write a prescription,
Right.
take Maui Wowie, two puffs every 4 hours, for whatever. It's always a recommendation, and the doctor has to fill out a form with specific information about that patient and then check off a box for one of the qualifying conditions, and then give that to the patient to submit to the authorities, and then they'll get a medical cannabis card. So what we did is we sort of took the role of that practitioner, to help that patient, guide that patient to the proper dosing intervals and ratios of cannabinoids that could possibly help them with the condition they came in with.
And like I say, and you said it there at the beginning. I view the big difference is like, this is one of the, correct me if I'm wrong, please, but this is like one of the only areas in medicine where the doctor he does recommend, and you kind of just do your own thing. Like, you think about any other case where you go to the prescription, I go to Walgreens and I hand them a piece of paper, and they have to get exactly what that piece of paper says. And I can't be like, no, actually I do like that. Like, you can do that at a dispensary and your doctor doesn't know about it, you know?
Yeah, and I think this goes back to just the illegality that
Yeah.
cannabis is under, and the lack of research, and the fact that pharmaceutical companies, by and large, really can't do anything with this. But you know what? Let's talk about that for a second.
Yeah.
Pharmaceutical companies, and I used to work for a pharmaceutical company. I was in sales, and they focused on single molecule drug entities. Okay. So here's this molecule, and they researched it, and they brought it to market, and they promoted it, and it was for whatever, diabetes, hypertension, whatever. You know as well as I do that cannabis has well over 100
Yeah.
molecules. There's cannabinoids, there's flavonoids, there's terpenes, there's precursor acids. There's all these things that sort of work together, in an entourage kind of effect. So how's a pharmaceutical company going to go ahead and do research and development on something that complex?
Right.
I'm not sure if this is ever going to be a pharmaceutical product. So we're not going to have physicians writing prescriptions for something coming out of a pharmaceutical product, for a product that they probably won't be able to do the research and development on.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. And I think to prove your point, using an actual cannabis example, like Epidiolex, right? Like, that is just CBD. Am I proving your point kind of, where you're saying like that? Because I'm thinking that's the one pharmaceutical. Well, Marinol too. I guess Marinol is like,
Synthetic. It's
yeah,
synthetic
synthetic
THC.
THC. Yeah.
Right.
So, but I guess, is that to your point? Like, it's funny when we see these pharmaceutical products, we see something that's synthetic. We don't see anything close to the whole plant, right?
Yeah, and there are some, natural pharmaceuticals. I mean, aspirin comes from, I forgot some kind of wood bark. And anyways, there are pharmaceuticals, digoxin, that's a heart drug, comes from plants. There are pharmaceuticals that do come from plants, but generally they take out the molecule, and then they research it, and they develop it, and they market it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Fox
Um,
Foxglove is what I was trying to come up with for aspirin.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Well, hey, I just had to show you this because I went to recently, this is just a little bit off topic, but I thought it'd make you laugh. I recently went to Psychedelic Science 2023 in Denver, Colorado, which is put on by MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Studies or Psychedelic Science. Anyways, I met a pharmacist there, and she had a bag that caught my eye, and I was like, did you buy this at the at the conference? And she said, no, I got it at a pharmaceutical conference. I love this bag. It says so many drugs, so little time. And it's just funny. You'd think that that's something she would have bought at the psychedelics conference, but she actually got it from a pharmaceutical like rep conference she went to. So just a little laugh there.
Well, yeah, that was a little laugh, and that's great. I'd like to hear more about your experience. I'm actually involved with a group called Chicago Med Psychedelics, and we meet monthly at this eclectic coffee house in Highland Park. And the group is made up of very well-known, internationally well-known sometimes, doctors. Um, I'm a pharmacist. We've got advanced degree nurses. We've got all kinds of healthcare professionals, and we talk about the medical benefits of psychedelics and cannabis. And and the coffee house where we meet at is in Highland Park, Illinois, and it's owned by the front man from the Smashing Pumpkins, Billy.
Oh, cool.
Billy, yeah,
I
whatever.
can't think of his name right now, but
Yeah. Anyway, I'll think of it. But we were published in High Times magazine in June, our group, and it was pretty cool just to sort of get that attention from a magazine that I've personally never read. I mean, I know it's counterculture,
yeah,
and
Billy
there
Corgan.
Billy Corgan. Yes, thank you.
Yeah,
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 counterculture and that, but it was kind of cool. It's been around for 40 years, High Times magazine. So, but yeah, I think there's a lot of good things happening with psilocybin and some others, and we'll see what the future holds.
yeah. While we're on that topic, I wanted to give you the space to tell people how they can join that, but I also meant to say at the top of the podcast that you also have a podcast. So you can you tell people how to join the Chicago meetings you just mentioned, but also how to find your own show? Don't you have a show?
I work with the Pharmacy Podcast Network, PPN.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and I don't have my own podcast, but I do work with this group out of Pennsylvania, and it's probably one of the most popular podcasts out there for pharmacists. I think there's between 98 and 122,000 regular listeners to the Pharmacy Podcast Network, and they've got topics all over the board. And I'm their cannabis topic, and we're going to be doing more on the topic of cannabis and psychedelics.
Cool. What'd you say the name of that podcast was again?
Yeah, Pharmacy Podcast Network,
Perfect.
PPN, and I don't have their website in front of me, but if you just Google Pharmacy Podcast Network, you'll be able to see it all.
Cool. Well, I wanted to get to modern day, and I know that now you're on the Medical Cannabis Advisory Board, but I don't want to skip to that. We were last talking about, you being in your dispensary and the difference that you offered in the market. Is there anything between then and now that you wanted to talk about before we get up to today?
Well, what happened, when adult use was coming around, and that was the beginning of 2020. I and my good partner, we were approached by some of these big MSOs, and they were on this big tear to buy everybody up, and
Right.
all the mom and pop shops, and we were a mom and pop shop, and so we did sell to one of the big MSOs, and it worked out fine for me. And then I worked for the MSO for just under 2 years, and it's sort of, you talk about what's happening today. I think what's happening today is these big MSOs have legal staffs, legal representation, and they're very concerned about their employees doing or saying anything out of the realm of what they're supposed to do and say. So in other words, a patient walks in and they've got shoulder pain. Oh yeah, this is good for shoulder pain. I mean, that's about as specific as they can get. They don't get into the drugs they're taking. They don't get into their medical conditions. They don't get into drug interactions. They can't do that because they're legally bound not to do that. And so workers in dispensaries today, it's become a transaction. It's very transactional, and you walk in. In fact, I was a buddy of mine from California, who I helped with getting off of smoking cannabis, and got him onto edibles and tinctures and things like that that really helped him, because he was developing emphysema and some other things that prevented him from smoking. He was in town for a few days for a high school class reunion and to see his family. And we walked into what was my old dispensary that was converted into what the MSO turned it into. And there was a guy at the counter, and we approached the guy, and he was very friendly, and we remembered each other. I guess towards the end of owning my dispensary, I met him or something. But my friend was looking at some of the tinctures that this guy brought out, and he goes, well, THCA, I mean, it seems like there's a lot of THCA in this, and is that going to give me sort of the psychoactivity that I'm looking for, from a tincture? And the guy said, oh yeah, that's going to convert to THC. And I said, well, I'm not going to mention his name. I said, well, I believe that THCA, when it's consumed orally, doesn't convert to THC. I mean, certainly when you smoke it, yes, but when you
Right.
take it orally. And he wasn't sure, but then he did admit that he thought that was the case too. But that's the level of detail that doesn't exist today in medical cannabis dispensaries, or at least what they're allowed and not allowed to say.
Yeah, and just because you mentioned it, and I wanted to, you mentioned there are acidic forms of cannabinoids, and you mentioned THCA. I've actually got
Right.
some THCA products, and they are interesting because, like you say, they are not psychoactive, let's say, out of the box or on the shelf. But when you heat the products, the THCA, the acidic form of THCA, converts to delta 9 THC via decarboxylation. And yeah, like you say, but if you took that orally, I don't know, maybe it heats up a little bit in your body, but like you say, probably not enough to make it activate into THC. And I realize I'm way out of my understanding right now talking about.
If you take an edible that is all THCA, you might experience some beneficial effects. I mean, if
Sure.
you've got pain or whatever, you're not going to get high from that.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
yeah. It's interesting that so I just wanted to make sure to break it down because you mentioned it like, well, if you heat it, it could. I wanted to break down like what you meant by that. So yeah, that's
And then
interesting stuff.
time also sitting on the shelf over time,
True.
it'll decarboxylate. So you've got that going on.
Right. Right. Yeah, it's very interesting. What's funny about that, you just mentioned that. So there's these THCA products, like I say, and these are legally sold in retail fronts. They are legal by the Farm Bill, so they don't technically have to be sold in a dispensary. And I've spoken to a few of these companies, and they're trying to make the THCA cartridges, but the issue they're having is when they put them on the shelf for a month or so, they decarboxylate, and all of a sudden, it's a product that you put on the shelf that was legal became illegal. Isn't that funny?
Well, yeah, and I think of Delta 8. I mean, how much
Yes.
experience do you have with Delta 8? And that's sort of the Farm Bill, loophole
Hmm.
that companies have realized and have produced these Delta 8 products, in the labs, converting CBD from hemp into that. And it's not regulated.
Right.
And I remember doing a presentation in Indiana. I was on a panel, and there was a big room with all of these vendors, and 90% of them were Delta 8 vendors. And because Governor Holcomb he's not going to do anything unless the federal government does something.
Sure.
So medical cannabis is never going to be legalized there as long as he's governor.
Right.
But Delta 8 is all over the place, and it could be it could be beneficial. It's kind of like a light beer, but at the same time, a buddy of mine went to a bakery, a local bakery that
Has those things, has those
had
products. I think I
had
know what you're
those.
talking about.
Yeah, it was I think on Super Bowl Sunday a couple of years ago, And he said, well, what do you got? And the guy said, well, we've got light, mid-range and heavy. And what do you want? He goes, oh, I'll just take mid-range. And he sold him a cupcake or whatever. And it was 42 milligrams of Delta 8. So he went to his friend's house. They turned on the Super Bowl. They split it in half. So they each got 21 milligrams of Delta 8. And by Tuesday, they were still buzzing. So, you just don't know.
I've been there, and like the problem is that when I've been there, I've planned for it. I could see how it'd be an issue if you didn't plan for it, right?
Right. Well,
Right.
or it's unexpected, right?
It's
You
unexpected,
expect to get
exactly.
a little bit of an effect, but all of a sudden that effect is there and it doesn't go away for a couple of days. That's concerning.
Yeah. Well, hey, my apologies. I got us off track a little bit. I had asked you, you were explaining a story with your friend, and I think we were working our way up to modern day. You said, well, I came back to the dispensary after I had sold it. Things had kind of changed. Um, does that jog your memory as to where we were?
Yeah. And it's fine. I mean, I think with any corporate takeover of a smaller business, the employees from the smaller business generally don't last very long, and that was the case here. And the dispensary was converted into their brand, and it's big and beautiful, and they had to relocate it to an area that was more commercial, and they did that.
What was your dispensary named? I'm not asking its current name, but what was
Oh,
it named?
it was called PDI Medical,
Okay.
Professional Dispensaries of Illinois, and that's the name that we went with, and then it disappeared after it was sold.
Yep.
So, the company, and then I worked for the company for just under 2 years that purchased my dispensary. And, it was an interesting, 2 years. COVID happened right after we sold. So, no one was going into the office. Kind of glad I got out of the dispensary business at that time
Yeah.
because we would have remained open and that would have been risky. So, it was it was an interesting experience. So really nothing more than just, the THCA story and my friend, understanding better what tinctures and edibles he could use while he was in Chicago, that to hold him over until they got back home to California.
Yeah. Well, feel free to back me up a little bit if I'm skipping too far ahead. If there's anything, that happened in your story that happened before this, but I've been excited to talk to you about the Medical Cannabis Advisory Board. I know
Okay.
that you had your first meeting. And so I guess I wanted to ask first, like, how did you join the board? And then I thought maybe it would be interesting to talk about a little bit of history of the board. I've got some history with some citations if people want to look into it on a unrelated project that I've been working on, but I've got some information about the original Medical Cannabis Advisory Board. But before we did that, I guess I wanted to ask you, yeah, how did you? I remember the last time we spoke, you said, "Hey, I'm going to be on the board," but I was curious, like, how did that come to be?
Well, okay. The original board was created during the Rauner administration, and the whole idea behind the board, I think there was 9 members, and their purpose was to listen, have meetings twice a year, public meetings in the Thompson Center, and patients would come in and say, okay, I submitted a petition for my condition I wanted on the medical cannabis I want it on the list of conditions that are approved for medical cannabis.
Yep.
And so this board, the patient would fill out something online and submit it, and then they would all come together, twice a year. And so the board would talk about it and then make a decision. And then that decision would go off to Dr. Shaw, who was the head of the Department of Public Health, and Bruce Rauner. And I think for the time the Medical Cannabis Board was active, they had 4 to 6 meetings. And every time they submitted their recommendations to Shaw and Rauner, they were all categorically denied.
Yeah.
And so Rauner started getting a lot of bad press because, some of these conditions were, really good conditions for medical cannabis, and they were all denied. And so the board was disbanded, but at the same time, Rauner disbanded the board. I think he added PTSD and chronic pain to the list of qualifying conditions. So he tried to save face.
Yeah, and if I could read from an article from the time, um, this was Chicago Magazine, April 10th, 2017. What happened to Illinois Medical Cannabis Advisory Board? And Lou Lang, Representative Lou Lang, told the group, which included Leslie Mendoza Temple, Jim Champion, Michael Fine, all members of the now defunct Medical Cannabis Advisory Board, that the governor had offered him a deal in exchange for extending the program another 3 years and allowing 2 new conditions, PTSD and terminal illness, to qualify patients for a medical marijuana card. The board must disband. And to your point, there were only 6 meetings. I'm counting 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And folks, you can look at the meeting agenda and minutes for each of those meetings, as you can see by the purple links here. I've clicked on a few, and they're interesting reads.
Well, thanks for bringing that up, and the 2 qualifying conditions that Rauner added. I was a little off on that, but I knew it was something along those lines.
Yeah.
But yeah, that board was disbanded, and current day. I remember talking to Dr. Leslie Mendoza Temple, and she mentioned that they're planning on resurrecting the board. And she goes, "You ought to, apply to be a member of the board, Joe." And I said, "Okay." So basically, I went through a process that everyone that is currently on the board went through, to submit information, to do documentation. I mean, it was a lot of information they wanted, to make sure that I was the person who I said I was, as well as I didn't have any background, negative background information. So I applied, and it was a process, like I mentioned, and I don't know, it took about 1.5 years, 2 years before we had our first meeting, which was just a couple of weeks ago. And it was a virtual meeting. I'm wondering if we're going to have a physical meeting, and we're all wondering, are we going to be doing more than just listening to petitions and adding conditions to the medical cannabis list of qualifying conditions? So what we don't know, because we're going to have another meeting in February, is are we going to be doing more? Because there's a lot more that needs to be done. Curbside service, which is something that we were working together with, is one. Having a patient walk into any dispensary, not just a medical cannabis dispensary, and getting the same
Yes.
price. So there's that, because some of them have to travel very far to get to a specific medical cannabis dispensary.
Right.
Education is another thing. Education of dispensary staff. There's a number of things that we all believe can be addressed and possibly changed, and we'll see if that happens.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm going to be interested, to see what power you've been vested with, because like you say, in the past I've read that state law originally created the board to evaluate this, basically what you just exactly said earlier, to evaluate positions to add new ailments to the program's list of debilitating conditions. The Chicago Mag describes the process as a time-intensive process involving reviewing hundreds of pages of documents, scientific evidence, written and spoken testimony from petitioners and other advocates, then voting to recommend new conditions for the program. But yeah, I am curious if you would have other things, or especially, I'm glad you brought up education. And maybe you weren't thinking in this way, but I've been asking lately, lawyers. So medical cannabis patients are allowed to cultivate at home, right? Mm-hmm. How do they travel with that product? And it's you get a lot of mixed answers from law enforcement and attorneys. I've tried both. Law enforcement will tell you that cannabis must be in its original dispensary container. And then I say, but officer, I'm allowed to cultivate cannabis at home. Are you saying I can't travel with my medicine? And he's like, oh yeah, I should talk to the sheriff's board about that one. We've not been given any directive on how to deal with that. And then I talk to attorneys, and they say basically the same thing. They say, hey, look, we know it's your medical cannabis product, but maybe put it in a container that looks like dispensary packaging. Even though it's not from a dispensary, it kind of looks like dispensary packaging. And so that's the advice I've been given by attorneys. But again, I don't know that this is the power vested in the medical cannabis board, but just in the realm of education, I'd be interested to see like a topic like that taken on, or like a topic you mentioned, which is just like patient education and in-store education like you used to offer in PDI, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And, traveling with cannabis, we always, if we had that conversation with a patient, we would always say, keep it in your glove compartment until you get
Right.
it.
Right.
And, and then as far as crossing state lines, well, that's illegal. So
Bingo.
you want to get on a plane and fly somewhere with your
And I
medical.
just mean interstate, but yeah, you're
Uh,
absolutely right. You can't
okay.
go, you cannot, like, I mean, inside the state. But yeah, like you say, you cannot, no matter what, cross lines with cannabis because of federal law.
Right, right. So, the best advice we gave was don't open it, keep it in your glove compartment.
Yeah. Yeah. But like I say, with medical cannabis, for example, this is my container for medical. This is my homegrown medical cannabis. So,
Yeah, that's not going to fly.
right, right. And
Right.
it's like, well, hmm. So, anyways, I'm just curious. I will be curious, and I'm hoping you get the answer. What other, will you be limited to recommending conditions, or will you have some other leeway in the form of at least informing the public? Not that you're like changing policy or anything like that, but at least providing, because I do feel that there's just so much in this that lacks clarity, you know, with cannabis, and so everybody's like, I mean, some people would think, well, I grew this at home, and since I'm allowed to, I could travel with it, right? I don't know. I've not been able to get a clear answer.
Well, we were actually encouraged. One of the state employees that organized the meeting, who ran the meeting, we asked the question: Are we going to be able to make some of these recommendations or have these discussions about improving the program? Because we all feel that medical patients are being left out,
Yeah.
when they walk into dispensaries. That's not to say that all dispensaries are that way, but most of them are.
Yeah.
There are actually some quality people working in dispensaries that can offer up some good information. But I think the idea here is, the state was, they said, yeah, we'll have that discussion, and we're open to having that discussion about improving the medical cannabis program for patients in Illinois. So we'll see what that means when we have future meetings.
Awesome. And how did aside from that, how did the first meeting go? All I'm able to see right now, by the way, for this is the agenda. And I'm not asking you this. I'm just speaking out loud. I can only see the agenda for your most previous meeting. I don't see the minutes yet, but I'm just curious, looking at the agenda, was there anything else notable that you felt like would be cool talking about? Because it
Well,
sounds like this is where that came up. Probably point number skip 6, role and scope. You were probably like, what is the scope of our, right?
right, right. No, 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 it's good. You've got your fingers on the pulse of this thing, so that's cool. Um, the meeting went on not for the entire length of time that was allocated for the meeting. And what was also surprising to me is the first Medical Cannabis Advisory Board was like 9 board members.
Yeah.
This one, I don't know how many members there are. I don't know if it's 16 or 26. Um, I'm not aware of a list of everyone that's on the board and what their positions are. So I guess I'm concerned about, okay, if you've got 26 people on this board, and I'm not sure that's the number, how are we going to get anything done? You know?
Right.
Um, so we'll see. I guess we'll get more information for the February meeting, and I think what we need to do is go on the IDFPR's website and see when the meeting is, and search it out, because I'm not sure they're going to be offering up that information through emailing all of us. Or I'm not exactly sure what's going to happen, but I'll be talking to some people that are on the board, and we'll figure this out.
Yeah. And folks, I'll do my best to share the information. All I can see is it looks like the upcoming meeting is in February of 2024 based off of the agenda. But like, when, and like you say, how you get notified. Obviously, as the public, we may not, since we're not on the board.
But the
But
public will be notified.
oh, they will be. Okay, good.
Because there was a couple of people that, they opened it up for public comment, and there was a couple of people that were on in that virtual meeting that had 3 minutes to talk.
Good.
And so the public will be notified.
Cool. Well, folks, if you want to set up a place to kind of keep an eye on this, I can put this link in the um, podcast description. This is where I've been able to find all of the meeting agendas and meeting minutes for all of the Medical Cannabis Advisory Committee board meetings. So yeah, this is where the new one will pop up, and you'll be able to click on it, and it even has the WebEx link or a call-in thing, and I think you would be able to listen in, which is pretty cool.
That's
So
perfect. That's perfect.
yeah, trying to keep the public informed. Well, I want to be respectful of your time, Joseph. Are you good just for a little bit longer, just to close out with some conversation?
Sure.
Cool.
I'm good.
Sweet. Well, how do you can I ask you if this is too personal of a question, it's okay, but do you use cannabis often? And the reason I was asking is my follow-up question would be, how do you feel about the market today? But I didn't know, do you use it often or whatever?
Well, I was noticing you using it, so that's
Yeah.
I can ask you the same question, and I have that answer, right? I I do occasionally. Again, cannabis is medicine. That's how I use it. I don't really use it to get high, but I developed maybe about 3 years ago tinnitus in my right ear, and I remember having a patient that had really bad tinnitus. I call it tinnitus. Doctors call it tinnitus. Anyways, in both ears, and I remember doing the research, and
Mhm.
I learned that THC can aggravate the condition. So I'm very careful about using THC because I don't want to aggravate the condition in my right ear. It's not bad. It's very mild, but at the same time, I'm not going to use cannabis that often because it does aggravate the condition.
Yeah, that
So
makes
I do
sense.
use it for sleep, and that's really about it. In fact, I was just I saw Bruce Springsteen at Wrigley Field.
Yeah.
And it was interesting because, one of the couples that we were with were from out of town, and he wanted to, pick up a joint.
Sure.
And we walked into the dispensary that's right by Wrigley Field. And I walked in too. I mean, and that's the company that purchased my dispensary, right?
Hmm.
So remember, I figured I'd just pick up the edibles that I like, which is a 1-to-1 indica gummy that just helps me with sleep. And I went up to the person behind the cashier, and I said, "Oh, okay, I'm going to buy this." And okay, fine. She goes, "Are you going to the event tonight?" I said, "Oh, you mean Springsteen?" He goes, "Yeah." Well, if you show me your ticket, we're offering up a $20 discount on that product. I said, "Wow." So it would have cost me like $30 plus all the taxes, wound up costing me like $13 total for this container of gummies that I actually
That
do
ain't
use.
bad.
So I thought that was pretty cool, good marketing.
Yeah. Yeah, that ain't a bad deal in Illinois.
No,
13
no,
bucks.
that's not. And I think prices, I was just reading an article in Massachusetts on how the decline in price is forcing a lot of dispensaries out of business. And yeah, there's a lot of activity going on. We'll just see how all this, and then I think by the end of the year, and maybe you're hearing this too, is we might see something on the federal level as far as relief from the Schedule 1 jail that the industry is in.
Yeah, it does seem I know what you're referring to. It has become unclear to me though. In the past few days, I saw somebody asking HHS, which I believe is who President Biden directed to send a letter to the DEA to start that process, and they had no record of the letter ever being sent. So
Wow.
a reporter recently, or actually, no, I don't mean to say a reporter. A reporter shared the story, but I believe a elected representative has now asked the DEA, "Do you have, did you receive this letter?" Because yeah, everybody's talking about this happening at the end of the year, but people are trying to figure out like where in the process are you, and that to me is not a good sign. But hey, fingers crossed that everything we're hearing becomes true. I would love personally, I'd love for cannabis to be descheduled. I don't know how you
Right.
feel about this topic, but I think descheduling is the best way to go. I've heard concerns about rescheduling, and it's the idea that if you put it in a different schedule, well, let's just put it this way. This is kind of a joke somebody made. They said, well, cocaine is technically a lower schedule than cannabis, but how easy is quality, safe, regulated cocaine? How easy is that to acquire? In other words, the point is just because we reschedule cannabis, that may not solve the problem depending on the schedule we put it into and the people we allow to control it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah. And I've got an additional thing to say about that. I think descheduling is the way to go. Rescheduling means that the federal government is still overseeing this.
Right.
And we really don't want that. We really don't want dispensaries under. When I worked for a compounding pharmacy right before I opened my dispensary, we saw an inspector like once every 2 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
I had an inspector in my dispensary 4 times the first year we were operational. So they really pay attention to this, but it's for all the wrong reasons. I mean, they were looking for things that we were doing wrong. And one of the things that we were doing wrong, and I don't know how much more time we have.
Oh, I'm
uh,
good on time. I'm totally good on time. I was just trying to be respectful of yours. So,
okay. Um, at the beginning of the program, as the growers were coming online, we only had flower product. And I had one young couple that had a child who they were caregivers and their child was a patient. And so that was all copacetic from that standpoint. They needed something for their child's seizure disorder. And since we didn't have any other products besides flour, we had a product called an easy butter maker.
yeah.
And you can, convert the flour into an oil. Anyway, so we gave the parents specific instructions on how to make an oil, and we a particular flour product that we had, and we calculated out all the cannabinoids in there and what you would get and how you would do it and the dose that you would use. And it worked. I mean, this kid's seizure disorder actually got better. But we had an inspector come in like a couple months later, and one of the questions was, have you sold any flour to a minor? And our response was, well, when that's all we had, yes. And it was in our BioTrack record, right? And then we got fined for doing that. So, boom, we're doing the right thing, but we're getting penalized.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's an interesting one because they just assume because the product is flour and typically people smoke flour, they like, well, you can't sit, but it's like we're not even using it that way. You just said you're infusing it, you know? So it
Right.
is edible. It's basically the same thing. We just took a few extra steps.
Well, we took the steps that were available at that time.
Correct. Yeah. So, um, yeah, and I guess my point in bringing up descheduling is, folks, I don't know if you knew this, but the list of controlled substances, Joseph, feel free to disagree with me as a pharmacist, but they're only fun drugs. And that's just kind of a joke. To be more serious, to make my point, neither alcohol or tobacco are legally listed as controlled substances, and I think cannabis should at the very least, even though we can agree that they're not the same as those two other drugs I mentioned, they should be at the very least treated the same, right?
I agree. I mean, we've got Breaking Bad, Walter White, and methamphetamine, and that's in the same category as cannabis. And, that'll rot out your teeth and destroy your life. And
Sure.
yeah, cannabis is very different. It doesn't do that. So, and we don't have to get into that, but it's just, it's embarrassing. Our federal government is embarrassing.
It's kind of crazy when you think about the fact that alcohol is basically as legal as it is because it's in our freaking constitution.
Mhm.
Tobacco is just kind of like, I don't know exactly. Well, ATF. The ATF regulates alcohol and tobacco, I guess you could say, and firearms. Um,
Right.
but yeah, I'm just thinking about this dichotomy in the country that we live in. It's interesting to me that we have a constitutional amendment that guarantees our right to consume alcohol. Um, but then cannabis, a drug, and psilocybin, other psychedelics are in this crazy scheduling regime. It's just yeah, I think people get my point.
Right.
But I feel like we got off on a little bit of a tangent. How do you told me about your use and stuff, but and you, I guess maybe you said you were offered a pretty good deal, so maybe that was your comment on the market as it stands. But did you have any other thoughts on the market as it stands from a consumer perspective, or anybody else that you've talked to?
Well,
You brought up some really good points, by the way, the curbside and the shopping at every store. Like, come on, we need that to
yeah,
happen.
there's some other points. Let me just see if I could pull that up real quick.
Sure.
Word. Let's see. Oh yeah, here we go. Um, yeah, we want to address bullet points on the caregiver program, allow caregivers to cultivate. Michigan has a program like that. Allow people to be caregivers to more than one patient. Reduce the caregiver fees. There's homegrown access. I think you can appreciate that.
Oh yeah.
There's all dispensary access for med patients. We talked about that. Supply issues, demand study to identify and address supply issues for medical patient needs. Home delivery, that's another one. Administrative issues. The state needs to improve IDPH site with reliable, updated, useful information for patients. Virtual cards are unpopular with many patients. Can we offer an option? Oh, here's another good one. It's safety at cannabis events.
Mm,
I know someone who went to a consumption lounge recently, and there was a gravity bong, I think it's called.
yeah.
She's in the consumption lounge and she took a hit of that.
Hmm.
And this person doesn't have any kind of seizure disorder, never had, but had a seizure. And was on the floor, peeing in her pants and convulsing. And she was with a friend who was a social worker, so she had, some help, but there was no one at the dispensary that was able to offer her any help or assistance, or no one called 911. So her friend took her out into the parking lot, and she's like throwing up, and there's someone getting in their car right next to where they're at, and who worked at the dispensary. And she goes, well, what happened? Are you okay? And she was getting better. She sat her down by a tree and she was recovering. But she said, well, yeah, I use this, and I think it's called a gravity bong. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Um, and I had this reaction. She goes, oh, we've had a lot of reactions like that. And so this woman who's an activist, in the industry, has developed a company to offer up, emergency medical treatment personnel to attend all cannabis related events, that are out there. And I think she's got something going. So we'll see. But that is one of the issues we want to discuss with the state.
Awesome. I'll show a visual of what I think you're talking about right now, because they're pretty popular and they're at most of the smoking lounges right now. It's this device. It's called a student glass. And so he's using water. The water and gravity is what's pulling the smoke through. And then it shoots it using gravity into your mouth. And it's like a really large amount of smoke that you probably naturally would not be able to pull out of a bowl. And it just shoots it so quickly into your mouth and like down your throat that, yeah, especially if you're not seasoned. And by seasoned, I mean like used to smoking like that. Like, yeah, that could really overdo it for you. I mean, yeah, I could see how people could have scary experiences. I do get a little hesitant about that requirement to have medical like I don't know. I think training should be required or something. There should be something more. But the only reason I get a little like hesitant on that is I've been actually visiting some of the consumption lounges around state. And one of the cool things about the way that the law is written with consumption lounges, and I wanted to get back to some other points you brought up, but just really quickly, consumption lounges, I think, are one of the easiest businesses, cannabis businesses, to open in the state of Illinois right now, because all you need to open up one of those lounges, and maybe this point I'm about to make is to my detriment when you want to talk about patient safety, that it is so easy. Maybe you would argue there should be more steps or whatever, and I argue maybe more training. But anyways, you just need a tobacco retail permit, which I could go and buy one right now and probably have one in an hour. And then you need approval from your local municipality, zoning, whoever does that stuff. And you can open up a cannabis consumption lounge, and 2 locations have done that in downstate. So to back up for a second, as you mentioned, if you open a dispensary, you are allowed to open up a consumption lounge on site. There's a carve out from the Illinois Smoke Free Act that classifies consumption lounges as not a public place. So if it's because a public place is covered under the Smoke Free Act, right? So, anyways, just to kind of get back to my main point, I worry a little bit because I've talked to some of these business owners downstate that were able to just open up shop pretty easily. And so I always get a little hesitant when we talk about adding more rules, but these rules are in good spirit. And I do think that like it's worth having a conversation. I will say that they have their own mitigation strategies in place, the stores that I have, but they differed. They weren't standard, right? So one place offered a CBD water. Whether or not that works, right? I don't know. Other places like had their own mitigation technique. And so I do feel you're highlighting a real issue, but I guess the only reason I'm hesitant is just because of like the bar culture. And I'm not saying that's better, that we should model this after that, but just the fact that, but like, I don't know, I kind of like the idea of keeping a cannabis consumption lounge as simple as opening a bar. I felt like I got long-winded there, but that was kind of my point, you know?
And I hear your point, and maybe that's a good idea.
Yeah.
Keep it regulated like a bar.
But to your point, like a bar, there is some accountability in place where like the bartender has to like they could get in trouble for over serving you, right? So there's actually some accountability in place. So maybe that's what's worth talking about. You know what I mean? Like, how do we put some accountability on
and
that?
and and over serving. I mean, how much would
Right.
that
True.
dispensary worker know that they're over serving?
True.
Because that can vary from person to person, patient to patient, depending upon their use and their tolerance levels and all of that. I mean, drinks are easy. There's alcohol, and there's a percentage of alcohol in a beer or in a drink, and 20 of those are going to do a number on you.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think that's going to be very complicated.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, one of the points you brought up earlier, and I wanted to bring this up maybe to put a little arrow in your sheath, because not a lot of people I feel like realize, and maybe you do, but I wanted to say it for public knowledge and maybe for your benefit. You brought up caregivers and how, maybe we could add some more flexibility on that subject. And I feel like there's a line in the law that affords us that flexibility, but without clarification, it's unsure. Like I'm unsure. So in the CRTA, it says cannabis plants may only be tended by registered qualifying patients who reside at the residence or their authorized agent attending to the residence for brief periods, such as when the qualifying patient is temporarily away from the residence. However, authorized agent is not defined at all in the CRTA. And as you know, the term that we would use is caregiver. So I don't know if this is just like an oversight in the law or what exactly this means. I've asked the state for clarity. I've not gotten any. But this is an interesting thing because I've heard where you're talking about, and you're absolutely right. As far as I understand it, we share an understanding. But I've always been unclear as to what this language in the law means. And to me, it seems to indicate that somebody could tend to the plants when the qualifying patient is, quote, temporarily away. But it's just very unclear.
Yeah, what's an authorized agent, right? Define
Mm-hmm.
that. That's a good point. And you've done a lot more in-depth reading than I've done. I mean, I'll probably have to now that I'm on the Medical Cannabis Advisory Board.
No, but that was for you, right? That was an arrow sheath for you. Now you got it in your back. You can.
Well, thank you, thank
Yeah.
you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
And we used to have, I mean, the security person in our dispensary was actually a fireman, and he had EMT training, and so we had some issues. We had some seizures. We had some people falling down, and we were right there with instead of calling 911 right away, we were right there with everything that was needed to help that patient at that moment. So, and then do dispensaries have that kind of personnel? I doubt it. I don't think
Right.
so.
Right. Yeah. Sorry, if you put that paper back away, could you briefly run through that list again? I feel like there was one other one that I had a thought on that I lost.
Okay. Caregiver program, home grow access
Yeah.
at dispensary, all dispensary access for medical patients,
Yeah.
supply issues, home delivery, admin issues, product potency. No THC caps, increased THC from 100 milligrams per product for edibles,
Yes.
topicals, tinctures,
I love
to
that.
500 milligrams. Yeah.
That's a
Yeah.
good one.
Yeah.
That's a really good one. Dude, we have our edibles with the 100 milligrams. It can feel pretty ridiculous, especially when I just went to Michigan and you can buy 200 milligram edibles on the adult use side for $6.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
So I bought a few. But I was gonna show you. So you had asked me, I'm pulling up this clip really quick. I might not actually be able to cue that up right now. You had asked me maybe like my thoughts on the market, and I can try to keep it short. I'm unhappy as a consumer of cannabis, honestly, and it's because I'm privileged. My first cannabis market that I shopped in was Colorado, and so that was where the bar was. Deli style cannabis, cheap, affordable quality cannabis. And so when you switch over to this market, it felt a little jarring, you know. The pharmaceutical feel, and no offense to pharmacists, but it didn't feel like a dispensary, right? It felt like, didn't even feel like a gas station. It feels like way too clean. And I'm not saying that cleanliness, especially for a medical cannabis dispensary, these are all good things. I'm just saying that it really did seem like that was the jarring thing I noticed as a consumer coming to this market. And then of course the prices and lack of selection. And I feel like that can all be attributed to um our attitudes about how we've structured this market. People in Illinois politics and even folks that are fighting for licensees or have licensees will say that other states that have allowed for more people to participate are examples of failures because, well, you mentioned it earlier, dispensaries going out of business as a result of low prices, prices lowering. And if I could try to put it in a bottle, I wanted to play this clip from our governor, J.B. Pritzker, footage from December 7th, 2022, where he talks about this exact topic. And he tells us the state's view on this topic. Let's take a look at this short clip. I think it's like 45 seconds at the most.
The number of licensees in
Restart that.
We've limited the number of licensees in part because we wanted to make sure that the social equity licensees had a fair shot in the industry and they weren't just edged out to the very end and by having too many dispensaries in the market so that people can't make money, entrepreneurs who open places like Ivy Hall. So I'm in many ways I think that what you all view as a slow plodding process is also one that ends up with the right regulation and the right laws in place, and the industry growing at a pace that will allow social equity to take place within the entire cannabis industry, which is one of the purposes of it.
So that was a very eloquent way of putting the state's attitude out there on this subject. And I don't know, I understand the logic and rationale behind it. I'm not saying that I don't. In fact, if I could just briefly put it another way, and I'd be curious to hear if you have any thoughts on this topic, but an advocate recently came on our show. I believe it was J.R. Fleming, if folks want to check it out. And he said, look, Cole, when this program started in Illinois, these companies, these big companies, all had a guaranteed market share. He said, that's what we're asking for. That's what this social equity thing is giving us that same opportunity they had. In other words, issuing a limited number of licenses that ensures our success. And I understand that logic, and I understand the good intentions behind it. It just seems that from a consumer's perspective, it doesn't it's more business friendly than it is consumer friendly. Do you get what I'm saying by that?
Yeah, sure. I get exactly what you're saying. And it's not like a gas station where everyone drives cars and needs gas. I mean, it's a limited market. There's not everyone that's going to want it, even on the adult side. And I think slowly growing and adopting and getting the education and the information out there that this might be better than a glass of wine at dinner, to calm your nerves after a hard day at work, kind of thing. I mean, that's all a very slow grinding process.
Yeah.
And go ahead, I'm sorry.
Oh no, you go ahead.
I have some notes on the back of this list of things that we wanted to discuss for the meeting. And I thought this would be interesting to kind of review. There's 550 patient applications per week coming into the state.
Wow.
There's 830 renewals, extensions per week. There's 138,220 active patients. There are 377 in the opioid alternative program, so that's not very successful. And there's 52 qualifying conditions. So it's going to be 16 members. It's a 4-year term as far as the board members. The governor will select the who's going to chair it, and the meetings will be posted on the IDFPR website 48 hours in advance.
Awesome. Cool. Well, yeah, folks. So if that website that I'll have in the podcast description, keep your eyes on it in February. And I will too. And I'll try to send you out a note so that maybe you can listen in and just be better informed if that's something that you find yourself wanting to do.
And we don't know what day 48 hours in advance
that's
to. So,
right.
I guess we'll find out.
Yeah, exactly. I'm struggling to think of the term right now, but if I think of it, there's something you can actually set up. It's called a ping trip. You basically set up, it monitors any website. So I could set it up to monitor that website. And if something changes on it, it'll email me. So
good idea.
Yeah. So I might do that. But I guess just to take my thing a step further and wrap it up, I just feel that the limitations on licenses lends itself, and this is the worst part about it all. I could talk about how much it sucks as a consumer and how the high prices are, but would you agree that maybe somebody from Alabama would be like, hey, Cole, you sound kind of privileged right now. You're able to buy weed in a store. I can't, so I'll give you that, right? I'll give you that. I'm complaining about things that consumers in other states aren't able to complain about. Here's my real issue with the limitation on licenses and that entire attitude of like guaranteeing success. It, in a weird way, it seems to have lended itself to the continued criminalization of cannabis. I've been asking people. In fact, I just had attorney Bob Galholtra. He's a really well-known Cook County attorney. He just actually even gave a speech. It was going to be at the Cresco Education Center, but it ended up being rescheduled to being online. We released it, but they also released it as a YouTube recording. So if you'd like to see it, you can. At the end of that recording, I asked, why do you think possession limits still exist? Because that's one of the things he continues to have to defend people against the state on. And he said, well, frankly, the current companies benefit from having possession limits because then you are forced to buy a smaller amount at their store, keep going back. And if you are buying larger amounts out of it, like it keeps people in their market. And so it wouldn't benefit them to continue the decriminalization of cannabis. And that extends itself to home grow. I've even asked some of these new craft licensees, how do they feel about home grow? Maybe they could get some, energy from the community for their proposals if they paired their proposals with, pro community proposals, if you follow. And they say, look, Cole, I get where you're coming from, but how is home grow going to affect our market? And I was like, but that's not, that's where I get a little bit confused about protecting the market. Cause I'm like, was this about protecting people's market share, or was this about not throwing people in a cage anymore for simple possession, use, or cultivation of cannabis? Right. I know I'm thinking out loud right now. And
yeah. Those are interesting things that you said. And I haven't really given any thought to the idea of limited licenses and how it affects criminalization. I think criminalization or decriminalization is its own animal, and I know Pritzker has decriminalized cannabis, at least the people that are using small amounts.
right.
It's a traffic ticket, it's a parking ticket. So I think that's maybe where my thought is on what you just said.
Yeah. I guess to put it in another short way, it seems like the mechanism of enforcement for this system is the system that we talked about dismantling. In other words, if you don't walk on this tightrope, or if I did anything that these licensed cultivators do, if I sold this homegrown cannabis, they would throw the color of the law at me. Versus like if they make a mistake, it's a citable offense. And we've seen that like time and time again. And that's the thing. And I've just asked, like, if you'd think these companies would be at the front of the line to end all of this, but as I've been told, maybe that's not in their financial interest. But again, I'm just thinking out loud at this point. My apologies.
That's okay.
So, well, hey, Joseph, before we go, any other thoughts on anything that we've discussed today, or anything that we didn't discuss today that you wanted to mention?
I think we've been going for about an hour and a half. I think we covered everything. I mean, certainly there's more things to discuss, but I think I'm good at this point.
Cool. Sounds good. Well, hey, I'd love to have you back on in the future, and don't feel bad about going for an hour and a half. We are notorious for long format conversations.
Oh, you are? Okay.
It's something that I love, but I agree though, we've exhausted our topics for today. I'd love to reconnect with you in the future, maybe even after this February meeting, to see how you're feeling about things. And I just wanted to say again, I appreciate your time and what you do.
Sure. Well, I appreciate being on your show, and thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, folks, I hope you found as much value in this conversation as I did. We'll see you on the next episode. Take care.